as we get started tonight, I did want to just kind of mention this is going to be very informal. It's mainly just it's a conversation between two people. So we're just going to go ahead and get started right now. So I want to again thank you for sitting down with me, Jason. So we're going to just get right into it. One of the big news items right now across the whole Southeast, the devastation of the hurricanes, Hurricane Helene, and fortunately here in West Georgia we were able to dodge most of the devastation there. But we have had damage here before, and there's a possibility we could have damage in the future. But what effect will the storm have on us locally in the future?
Yeah, well, first, Andrew, thanks for having me here, and it's always great to be with you and talk about these issues. Yeah, we were really lucky here in West Georgia. I'll tell you that my family was on fall break right before the storm was approaching Florida and coming up to Georgia. And I think many people will tell you here in this part of the state, we thought it was literally just going to buzzsaw right up between Alabama and Atlanta.
Right, the original track was right
where it was going, and we got really lucky. In the middle of the night, it kind of did a right-hand turn, and then unfortunately for a lot of our brothers and sisters in South Georgia, it was very devastating. I believe Alma, Georgia, had a wind gust of over 100 miles an hour. And so if you think about Hurricane Michael and the impact it had on South Georgia, some of my colleagues, my friends, my coworkers that live and work in South Georgia would say it's 8 to 10 times worse than what they experienced with Hurricane Michael. So I think there's a long road ahead. We know, thankful for the city of Cedartown and others all across this region have been loading up tractor trailers, bringing them to folks in various different school districts and EMA sites, emergency management agency sites, and the number of public safety folks that have been down there working with families. I know there's some public safety law enforcement folks here in Polk County that went to South Georgia. And then also, which is fascinating, and I think people forget, is just the impact of how a farmer recovers. And that's the hardest hit industry. Our number one industry in South Georgia was hit. And so the teams of disaster relief teams that left here from this community, our farmers, our leaders that have gone down there to not just pull trees off of people's houses, but also to figure out, okay, what is their next move in terms of picking up the pieces in terms of way of life. And I know that there's been even conversations with some of our extension agents over the last week or more, having discussions on how do they prepare themselves to have this discussion with a farmer in terms of whether they're ever going to be a farmer again, potentially. It's some pretty sad, emotional stuff. And I know I've had my workers down there delivering water, tractor trailers of water to Jefferson County, and other places, Toombs County. And I think even for some of us that are up here, it's had a pretty traumatic impact. Nothing like what the people in South Georgia or East Georgia are experiencing, but as one state, this has impacted everyone. And if you don't think it has, then come talk to me afterwards or call me and I'll explain it to you, because this one's one for the record books and probably had the most impact we've ever seen in our state's history. Well,
I know that a lot of the impact, you mentioned the crops, and you go back to Michael, some of the crops have been were devastated by this. As far as loss of the crops and all that in our state due to Helene, have we seen that impact as well?
Yeah, we've seen it hit the pecan industry, blueberry industry, cotton industry. We've seen, in some cases, the entire operations of a farm industry wiped out. That includes the supply chain of who's potentially bringing food, chemicals. The other part too is a lot of these businesses or business leaders, pick up the pieces. All of their employees are impacted, and maybe they don't have somewhere to go back to work. Our timber industry, one of our biggest ecosystems in the state in terms of our economy, almost completely wiped out. And when we think about, what does that mean? It means, impacts to our supply chain. It means, is food getting on the table? Certain staples that we rely on as Georgians, or even across the Southeast or across the country. What does this mean in terms of the bigger picture for Georgia in terms of importing and exporting goods? So I think, the assessment has said that, the impact to the state's over $6 billion, but I don't think we truly know what is the way of life impact, and how is that really going to impact us, not just for the next weeks and months, but potentially for the next 5 years to even a decade or more, because, as one of our audience members mentioned earlier, you go put a sapling in the ground, go plant a new tree or a new crop. That's not stuff that just comes up out of the ground overnight. And then I think the other piece that we have to think about too, in terms of this age of technology, this age that we're living in right now, is the concern as to technology and other things potentially as farmers are really trying to figure out, do I start over and grow and build what I had in terms of my family legacy, or do we start seeing the ag community or farmers potentially flee and sell property, and maybe that property is not an ag industry. So I think there's some real serious conversations that have to happen. And I think all of us need to participate, and those of us that are experts here in this community helping those families in South Georgia kind of get through this as we're seeing right now.
Kind of sticking with the farming aspect of things, farming and agriculture, that's a pretty big industry in Polk County. There's a lot of people involved in that industry. What are some of the challenges you're hearing from your constituents about some of the issues facing our farmers and those who are either raising crops or may have livestock or whatever? What are some of the big challenges we're seeing right now?
Yeah, there's quite a few, and just to give a shameless plug, I know on October 28th we'll be back at this great campus to host a study committee on farmland preservation, so really timely topic. I think we'll talk about what just happened with the hurricane, but then projecting out, the future of the ag industry. I think one of the biggest threats to the ag industry here in this county and surrounding counties here, in West Georgia, counties that border Alabama, is just the, constant, enormous growth we're seeing from Metro Atlanta. I think there's no secret that we're starting to see large job announcements come to this county, which is fascinating, which means at some point, hopefully your taxes go down. We'll talk about taxes later. But I think as that growth happens, as we've seen even in a small town, Doraville, like where I grew up, my family, my mom moved to Atlanta in 1962, and Doraville back in the day in North DeKalb County was a dairy farm. It is no dairy farm now. And I think, whether it's a perceived threat to way of life, and you'll keep hearing me talk about fabric of society or way of life or prosperity, I think we have to think about, what is that balance? Because there is a special place in terms of not just Georgia history and I think this community, but I think in terms of the products and things that, that just can't disappear, should not disappear overnight. And how do we, not necessarily subsidize that, but continue to support it? And maybe it is through greater opportunity of innovation. Maybe it's greater opportunity of technology injecting itself. Because we've seen, as a graduate of Georgia Tech, I will tell you, a lot of innovators want to go and help our farmers and go and start businesses in all parts of the state. And I think we got to figure out how do we bring those ecosystems together to protect our farmers, but also thinking too, how do we advance forward in terms of the next generation of the farmer and fight to protect the next generation of farmer, which I think some will say, that's, being a farmer is discouraged, but it shouldn't. Just like even in our trade world, my dad was a truck driver. We need more truck drivers. We need, more timber harvesters. I mean, we don't have these basic things, then as a society we will fail.
Well, farming is, it's essential for not only our community, for our country, because we have to have a sustainable food source, and that's just one of those things that has to be sustainable. And I'm glad to see that the state and you especially are focused in on that. I did want to mention one more thing, kind of moving on toward the business side of things. For those, of course, who hear the news, There's some good news out there. It's not all bad news. Georgia is still the best state in the nation to do business for the 11th year in a row. However, you don't really hear about Georgia being the number one state to do business, at least nationally. You hear about other states, Texas, Florida, things like that. But what does this title do to help our economy?
So I think we first got to take a step back and talk about how do we get there and how do we maintain kind of, the pole position in terms of economics and economies across the country. I think, it's a very difficult thing to do, but I think it starts with leadership. I think, Governor Brian Kemp has led in many different ways. It started under Governor Deal in terms of policies of being, smart with how we're spending our taxes, how we're building our state budget, where are we making strategic investments into our communities. And there can be a lot of debate of what the priorities are. But I think at the end of the day, if we're not being fiscally conservative in the sense of it's an investment that's going to show a return on investment, it's your money, Andrew, we're spending, and what are you getting out of it? And I think the taxpayers should demand and always ask that question in terms of anything that we're doing. And I know right now in the Senate, we're having a lot of debate over tax incentives, everything from movie tax credits to pick anything else that you want to, even incentives that go and fund schools. I think every one of those, there's a return, and there's a good return, and sometimes not such a great return. But that's, one factor, and then also to that partner with local government. I think you got to have strong leadership as local governments. I used to be a city council member. I used to be a school board member. And I think cohesively, as long as everybody's listening to the community of what they want, because you'll find with a lot of elected officials, all they want to talk about is their wants, not what the community wants. It helps drive the business of, where we go in terms of a state with the economy. I always joke that, when we hear Governor DeSantis on the news or we hear about Governor Abbott and their successes, a lot of times it comes second or third after Brian Kemp or the Georgia legislature. I think, we've been cutting edge in terms of being very proactive about going at companies to move here. But I think one of the challenges we're seeing in terms of, the biggest threat to that number one pole position as being the number one place to do business is workforce. And continually bringing companies to Georgia, but having a ready, set workforce that can fill these jobs. If we ever get to a place, which I know a lot of industries are struggling across the board, if we get to a place where that is just halted, then that number one position is threatened. I think the other thing too, when we're talking about in the Senate, when it comes to education is, we have great graduation rates, but do graduation rates meet at the same standard as our literacy rate? I could push 100 kids out the door, but if 100 kids can't read, guess what? They're not going to succeed. You're not going to be able to hire them. They're not going to be able to take care of their family. They might end up in the jail here in Cedartown. Hopefully not. But I think that's the biggest threat that we have, one of the biggest threats that we have. So as, while we, work with business leaders to bring these jobs and even the small mom and pop businesses that are constantly under the gun of success or failure, here even in this community, I think we got to think bigger picture as in terms of what is the contribution back to the community and how do we make sure that they're able to sustain, and leverage the free market and leverage the policies that we as policymakers at the state are pushing down to the community to be successful.
So solutions, of course, here we are at Cedartown High School. Cedartown High School Public School District has a great college and career academy, which at the time it opened, cutting edge, and still very much on the cutting edge. A lot of other school systems around this area have opened up college and career academies as well since then. We've got great public education as far as secondary education, colleges, trade schools, things of that nature. That, to me, is, on the leading edge of getting our workforce ready for these jobs to move in.
Yeah, I agree. I think also, too, one of our biggest threats is not enough investment in science and math, science, STEM in our schools. I think we've done a good job here in West Georgia with several of our school districts, but I think when we think of the future and what is a recruiter or a company or an executive or even a small business owner looking for in terms of those science skills, those analytical skills, those people skills. I know the younger generation wants to stay and hide on their phones, but that's not going to get you a job. I think we got to think more broadly and be more aggressive in terms of what does that investment look like. And I know there's a prioritization. Our superintendent and school board probably go through this exercise every day of, I've only got a finite amount of money. What am I going to put that money in? Which bucket? And we have to think through too, as a state, as we're doing our budgeting, are there some different things that we should be doing differently to match up with where the future is going? And I do think there's opportunities there. I think there are some things that, as we work with our state agency heads and our commissioners to review where are they spending money, can we spend money differently, and make sure, again, going back to return on investment, for the future, making sure our kids are set up for success in the next generation.
Yeah, I would like to kind of circle back to the agriculture topic. Number one industry in Georgia, $73.2 billion economic impact. Here in this area, West Georgia, Polk County, Paulding County, we have a lot of farmland and agriculture. What effect does that have on our district as far as it being the number one industry?
So I think one of the threats, another threat, I know it seems like we're talking about a lot of threats, but sometimes you got to understand your threats in terms of how to, eventually grow and succeed. Large swaths of land, as we saw historically in Paulding County, as they go up for sale, home building, higher density growth, all of those factors start coming in terms of what does that mean for public safety, what does that mean for schools, what does that even mean just basically for the ag community? It's kind of eating up the ag community. I would say, there are lessons learned from your counties east of here. I live in one of the most high density, high home building areas in West Georgia and North Paulding. And I will tell you that we have oversized classrooms. We have over 3,000 kids at North Paulding High School, which is ridiculous. I think the home building is still out of control. Our roads are congested, and so in some cases, we're making up for lost ground because infrastructure was not created. Infrastructure was not built properly. Infrastructure is not constantly, every week, every month, every year, being reviewed in terms of success. So going back to, it's the same with ag, it's the same with any other industry. But I think the county and these counties out here need to make a decision as to what do you want to be when you grow up. And I think we're kind of at that place as newer families want to call Cedartown and Rockmart home. We're seeing it. I know my neighbors, even just next door, want to come out here because they're tired of the traffic. They're tired of 20 houses being built on a 3-acre, I'm being facetious, but a 3-acre piece of land. I think there's only so much a family wants to take sometimes. And I think we're seeing, the suburbs, the exurbs kind of, moving further out. And they're moving west, they're moving northwest, and they're, even moving up into the North Georgia mountains. Or they're just moving to South Georgia. But I think we have to figure out what do we want to be, what do we want to look like, and how do we make sure that everybody has an opportunity to succeed. And then I think the other threat too that we see is the increased poverty rates in this part of the state. In some cases starting to kind of hit the national average, surpass the national average, which is a whole other host of conversation we can talk about, Andrew. But I think that if we're not creating opportunities for even in our own community to give, homeless kids that I know are living in the woods near our community in Paulding County, and I'm sure there's homeless families and kids in this county. Everybody needs to have an opportunity to succeed, and if we're not looking at it in terms of being the number one place to do business, but at the same time putting a roof over these families' heads in many cases, then we're not doing our jobs as public servants.
And obviously the cost of living is going higher and higher.
Yeah,
and
every week it's going up.
And the value of homes, of apartments, of rent. It just keeps on going up, and especially here in this county, I know that the income is not really rising as high as steeply as some of the prices go, and I know that's a struggle for a lot of your constituents.
Yeah, I think it's a local issue, it's a state issue, it's a national phenomenon. I mean, the global economy impacts us here. Inflation is real. You can watch whatever you want on the news. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. Inflation is real. The cost of everything is going up. It is not backing down from where it was 4 years ago, when it started 4 years ago. I think we have to look at, too, in terms of, wages and earned wage growth and whatever, the stagflation that we've seen is driving people further back. We're seeing the property tax bills that people are getting. I know there are people in Paulding County that literally have just bought property. They're now having to figure out, do I have to sell my property because my property taxes are thousands and thousands of dollars. Those are real conversations. And I implore you as community members and other elected officials, and my colleagues, they hear me say it, we talk about it, is you got to get in a room and talk about these things, and not be afraid of the public in many cases. It's the only way we're going to solve these problems. But I think inflation it's not going away anytime soon. And I think there's some real challenges we're going to have to overcome. But the way we overcome that is having strong economic development, strong policies that lend towards business growth, ways and pathways and incentives for people to want to go start their own business, whether they want to be a mechanic or they want to do something else, getting their hands dirty. I think we have to encourage that in this community. And there's no one-size-fits-all business model, I think, for a lot of these counties out here, because I think most of us, look at these communities as bedroom communities or whatever. I think, we have an interstate that goes close to Paulding County in a couple of places. Y'all are probably about 30, 45 minutes, to the nearest interstate. But it's not impossible to get the jobs, and we've seen that here in Cedartown with recent job announcements. So I think we got to be innovative, but we got to have people like Edward Guzman and others who are willing to be go-getters and be innovative and do things.
Well,
that's a shameless plug for Ed.
Shameless plug for
one of the best city managers in the state of Georgia.
Yes. Well, I want to come back to the issue of land and some of the legislation that's been passed. I'll come back to that in a second. But one of the topics that you've been very active on is school safety, and just really not so much school safety, but children's safety. I know you're the father of 3 girls, and they play sports, and your wife is also an educator as well. School safety and protecting girls' sports is extremely important for you as well. In light of the recent school shootings we've had in Georgia, just a few hours away from here, what are we currently doing right now to improve the safety of our schools? And I must mention too, when we came to visit Cedartown High School to check this place out for this event, I was very impressed with what Polk School District was doing in their security protocols to even enter the building. But what are some of the things that at the state level that we're doing to help protect our kids?
Yeah, it's a big conversation. I feel like since the unfortunate situation that happened at Barrow County, it's, in many cases it's sad because it takes a tragedy sometimes to have these conversations even further than when, you're trying to pass policy before. But this is a discussion that, shouldn't go away. And I remind our community, I remind our other leaders that, it was only a few weeks ago what we saw in Barrow County. 2 years ago in the legislative session, we started talking about school security. And I do applaud this school district. And I know some people can, debate about, how much money is spent on school security or what is enough, what's not enough. I will tell you, as Andrew said, being the father of, 3 kids, Andrew, I don't think there is enough money that could be allocated to put on school security that, should ever be questioned. I think it should be the number one thing that should be focused on in terms of a policymaker or local elected officials. in terms of protecting our kids. Our number one asset in life, it's that important. What I experienced when we tried to pass our school security bill that would have mandated, and I'm not a big fan of mandates, I don't like mandates, but school security is that important to me to where, having technology that basically would create a central alert system for all of our schools in Georgia, all 180 districts, very similar to what is employed here in this building and in Polk County. The same technology we use in the state capitol to protect the legislature, the governor, our staff members, working with the Department of Public Safety. Because after we, saw the Marjorie Stoneman shooting in Florida, one of the biggest failures in terms of response was a unified alert system or unified communications to where everybody knew what was going on the moment the shooter started. In Barrow County, they didn't have that problem because they took one of the lessons learned that we talked about in trying to get our bill passed and employed it. And I've told your superintendent and school board in some ways, in a sad way, y'all are trendsetters because you were forward thinking ahead of what are all the mechanisms that should be in place. First mechanism is public safety response. And where's public safety going when they get to the building? And hopefully there's a school resource officer or there's a police officer on campus. But where do they go to find the shooter? Giving the teachers and even the students in the classroom the opportunity or the mechanism to alert people that are outside the building, inside the building, or miles away from the building on knowing, hey, I need help. And not just because I know in some of our schools, I don't know how it is in this building, I know in our high school, cell phones are basically kind of locked down. There's not great service, no service in some cases. And so getting that immediate, alert out is important to save lives, and it saved lives in Barrow County. I think the other thing too we've seen is how, in terms of how school resource money, school security money should be funded. I think the legislature this year, we put about $47,000 per school across the state. I expect the legislature and Governor Kemp to increase that amount and have, conversations of, if you had 10,000 more here, or we had more resources to do something over here, what does that look like and how is that meaningful? I do think, I'm not an advocate as somebody who grew up in neighborhoods that, I've talked about this publicly. My brother was in a gang. We grew up around guns and drugs and, not the most healthy element, a kid should ever have to experience. And saw some really crazy things in elementary and middle school. But fast forward thinking with factoring in technology, factoring in bullying, and I think all the other existential threats that we see even with drug use and everything else, I think every principal, every teacher, every superintendent, and beyond that, you as a soon-to-be father, me as a father, we feel comfortable and have peace of mind that when I drop my kid off in that building, every tool is being allocated, every tool is being utilized by the experts that are in that building protecting my kid until they get off the bus or I go pick him up at school, him or her up at school. I don't know that that's necessarily the case across our state. Our teachers fight like heck, like my wife, to protect our kids and our principals and our admins and our police and school resource officers. But I think the question is what more can we do? A lot of it comes down to money, like everything else, unfortunately. But I think we have to have serious conversation of, the schools that are, maybe not safe. And I know every school in the state under the laws we passed in the last legislative session, you have to have a school security plan. Almost every school district in this state does, and it's submitted to GMA for review. I know Director Stallings, he goes through and he reviews those plans with his team. I know there's been a great partnership in this county with GMA and our EMA folks. But I think, we got to think about mental health investments. I think we also got to think about too, there's a lot of kids going through a lot of stuff, whether it's domestic abuse at home, having a single parent, that's creating other mental health, behavioral health issues. Street violence, gang violence is only increasing in this part of the state. Some people may not think that, but it is increasing. Go ask the sheriffs in these counties, our police chiefs, and what they're having to do. I mean, it's an epidemic that is impacting our schools. It's when these kids are leaving this campus and they're going and doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, or the bad influence is trying to get on this campus through social media or other means to influence them to potentially go do bad things. So I think we have to look at every element in terms of how do we protect our kids. And I think the other thing we did too, when we passed Senate Bill 351, in terms of social media and banning it from schools, so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you're not able to access or should not be able to access on school devices. And having this real conversation, we passed age verification that Meta, Facebook, these companies, if you're 16 and under, you have to have parental consent next year in 2025. And so there's a lot of these different tools that some of the social media companies are recognizing, but all this kind of flows back into bullying. We updated our bullying statute for the first time in 11 or 12 years. Just think about that. The bullying statute in the state hasn't been updated in over a decade. And then you start factoring in social media and the other factors of what that means for prosecutors, public safety, our teachers, and how to encounter or deal with these issues. It just blows you away. And so we've updated and modernized some of those statutes. I do want to thank our Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones for his partnership, and he's a father too and understands these issues. But I think we got to, keep pushing the envelope. I'm not, all about, don't want to infringe on somebody's First Amendment rights. But as I talked about when we had this debate about social media, just like when it comes to driving a car, just like it comes to alcohol, when it comes to all these other things, I remember when I was in school, I had no rights. You want to have rights, go be 18, go off, get a job, do your things. But I think the same should apply for social media. All these things that are basically, creating this epidemic that are hurting our kids. Parents need to have a say. They need to get more involved in their kids' lives. And I think it's one of the only ways we're gonna save these kids. Because as we saw in Barrow County, that kid's father allegedly was not doing what he was supposed to be doing as a father, and neither was the mother. And I think there's going to be more to be told about that story. But I think however we can, make those investments and sustain those investments, we're going to have to do as a state and as leaders, and talk about it and not be afraid of some of the conversations that are going to be had. Because even somebody like me, who's a big proponent of the Second Amendment, I'm not going to advocate for somebody taking weapons away. I mean, the only weapons that should be taken away are from unlawful weapons carriers, gang members, people who are breaking laws. I think there's a balance we can have in this state, but we got to talk about it.
Conversation has to be made. Speaking of the conversation too, girls sports, women's sports. I know that's been a hot topic nationally, statewide, and I know that you've kind of taken an initiative on this. So tell us about what you have done so far with the state legislature and the protection of women's sports.
Yeah, so as Andrew said, I have 3 daughters. Growing up, I had 1 brother. And I see what is impacting this world today in terms of, what's being afforded to them in terms of opportunities. And where I come from, God put on this earth 1 man, 1 woman. Very, very simple. And we've seen this erosion of rules, whether it's in society, whether it's in, our schools, our higher ed. I mean, I think a lot of people, we talk about being in these buildings and our high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. We don't talk enough about what's going on in our universities or what's going on in our technical colleges or whatever. We can talk about that another day. But it's just as important, because if you're trying to graduate kids from here and send them there, it's a whole new world, and it's going to be a lot of the same conversations. But I think at the end of the day, we have to protect our kids. I know that our Lieutenant Governor, and I serve on the study committee that we're studying this topic in the Senate. And I think there's a lot to talk about, but I think it goes beyond just, genetics. It goes beyond that whole conversation, but it also goes to the discussion of facilities. Our facility is, equal? Are they separate? I've had this debate, and I'm not shy about talking about it, even in my home county, where I don't think we've done enough to be separate but equal in terms of, boys and girls having equal facilities as it is under Title IX. I think having the discussion where, girls are never feel threatened that a boy is going to walk into their locker room. A girl's going to worry about a male teacher walking in on them and compromising their situation. It's a real situation, and I've done some research, and I've seen where, not all of our school districts. I don't think we have any issues in the school district, but I think. When we talk about, modernizing facilities and we talk about, looking forward, I think, in order for my daughters to have the opportunity to fairly compete, where if they're going to go on the lacrosse field, or I even saw it in my own eyes, one of my daughters participating in a basketball tournament, practically, competing against boys, that's an unfair advantage. And there is a mental health aspect that also impacts them. And what does that say to them in terms of, them being a young woman and wanting to grow up in the society and be successful? So I think, it's a real conversation. It's another one, again, we can't shy away from. I know some people don't like to talk about the topic because, they may think it's awkward, or, some people might think it's insensitive. I've had folks, come at me saying, well, I'm being insensitive because I'm only looking at one gender. But, those are my beliefs. I'm not changing my beliefs. I'm following what and why God put me on this earth to fight for, and we're going to continue to do that every step of the way. In terms of policy, where we're going to go with this, I think there's some things we're going to talk about in terms of facility that impacts K-12, impacts higher education, but I think people need to get involved, and if you have questions. Not to put our Polk County leaders on the spot, but I think if the community has questions on this topic, they should ask their principal, they should ask their school board member, they should ask their superintendent, about their facilities. I know there's been record payouts from some school districts that did not follow Title IX because maybe boys got a brand new facility over here to play maybe one sport like baseball, and the girls team that plays softball got kind of stuck in the corner here. They didn't have lockers and restrooms, but couldn't go use the boys' room. And I think those, are just kind of community conversations that need to be had. But I don't think any parent should ever be, told no or told a story, or, we're going to modify a process to kind of check what is federal law, what is, in our state statutes and rules by the Department of Education to protect our kids.
One quick question, and then we're going to wrap things up here in just a moment, but this kind of goes back to the farmland issue. One of the things that has been in the news has been foreign, entities acquiring large portions of land in the state of Georgia, and not just Georgia, everywhere. What are we doing to, combat that as far as having a country with interest in one of our enemies, Russia, China, whatever? What are we doing to kind of combat that issue? And it is an issue, maybe not here locally, but it could be a local problem, especially when we're talking about the need for more farming.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. I mean, right now, our foreign adversaries, whether you're China, Iran, Russia, Venezuela, they want to own everything. They want to own intellectual property. Right now, while we're sitting here, they're probably listening to us on our phones. They might be listening through this Apple device, through maybe there's some app on here, I don't know, that they're pulling information from. You're not safe anywhere. And that's not being conspiracy theory. That's just the facts of the matter that are documented by our intelligence communities, by our leaders in Congress that serve on intelligence committees. We're constantly under threat. I know that we took steps where, and I only can talk about myself personally, I believe TikTok's a dangerous tool for our kids. It's not just, the aspect of kids being constantly on social media, but I think, the narratives and communication themes that China, it's, Communist Party owned, are pushing to, push the envelope in terms of narratives and impacting our kids and way of life and growing up. But also, too, as it relates to ag land, China buying land in this state across our country as strategic assets. The more land that they buy up, the less land there is for our farmers. Companies that are being bought by the Chinese government in terms of our food supply. And owning every aspect of those aspects of our food supply is a danger to our national security. It's a danger to our way of life when we talk about it. Purchasing land next to our military installations. I think everybody saw what happened with the spy balloon. That was very real. And there are other, iterations of the spy balloon and different forms of technology that our adversaries are using to infiltrate this country and lessen, our national security. But the number one way they can do it is through our land and our food supply. And the more that they own and the more that they can take, especially knowing that, China's economy is not great, it's crumbling. We'll probably see over, the next several years probably issues with their leadership, as we've seen in Iran and that whole Middle East saga going on between Israel and Iran. All that impacts in kind of what we're seeing with China and the axis of evil, or I call the axis of evil. That is very real, and it threatens us here in West Georgia. So we ban China, and they have to go through a process when somebody wants to purchase land now. If you're in real estate, there's a form now in your real estate packet doing commercial closings that basically you have to sign an affidavit and do some other steps that you're not a foreign agent of the Chinese national government. It's only one small step, but I think we got to be bold. I know our Commissioner of Agriculture, Tyler Harper, phenomenal guy. We've arrested and seized drugs from Chinese nationals, tied to different pieces of property in South Georgia. We know that we have assets in terms of moving product in the state where we've seen Chinese nationals trying to infiltrate our food supply. Bitcoin operations in South Georgia. Just absolute crazy stuff that is happening. But it's very real, and it's very close to home happening in our state. It's not just happening in New York or Miami or Los Angeles. It is here. Atlanta is an international city. And that international city has far-reaching impact, even out here in West Georgia. You can run from it, but you can't hide from it. And I think we got to stand up and do what's right.
All right. Well, as we wrap up this conversation, this has been very informative. But I'd like for you to just kind of anything that we might have missed that you might want to say to those here in the audience or those watching on our video or listening on the podcast that we're going to post later of your role in this district and also the future of what you see for the future of this district. And we know this is a pretty diverse district. Polk County and Paulding County are two very different places, but unified, of course, in the future of our young people and sustaining those others as well. But what are, I guess, in closing, what would you like to say to those of what you're wanting to do to, I guess, improve? That's a pretty big question, though.
Yeah, no. I think it's a great question, Andrew. What I tell constituents every day is, do not settle. Do not settle to be second. Do not settle that maybe because historically, going back 30, 40, 50 years, maybe going even back to when Tom Murphy was Speaker, which is always the story I hear, West Georgia is kind of an afterthought to the rest of the state. Atlanta gets everything, North Georgia gets everything, South Georgia gets everything. And I encourage our constituents, it can't just be me. It just can't be Andrew. It can't be just everyone else. Everybody has to do their part to demand and expect excellence. That is excellence in the classroom. That is excellence in terms of what are we doing to fight for jobs. That's excellence in terms of tax policy. I think it's excellence in terms of how are you treating your next door neighbor. I told people when I campaigned out here that I don't live in this county. I don't live in Polk County. I live in Paulding County. But I would still treat you just as if you lived next door to me with the same respect. I'm not going to shy away from a debate, or if I think something's wrong or inappropriate. But I think at the same time, like, if we all don't kind of fight for that standard and whatever it is people believe in, some people in this community, they want to see more election integrity. Other people just want to see food put on their table. I think other people want to see lower taxes. Other people want to see, greater technology investments out here. And I think we got to be bold. We can't settle. But I think if, we put all the kids in this high school in this room or one of the other rooms and said, hey, what are your dreams? Our to-do list should be what is their dreams, and not sending them to Texas or Florida or out west to achieve the dreams. So why can't we do that here in Cedartown? Why can't we do that here in Rockmart? And involve the kids into it. I mean, I have passed legislation that has come from high school students. Some of the best ideas I've come up with, they're not my ideas, have come from our younger generation. To your point, I do believe my district is probably one of the most diverse districts in the state, representing an urban area, a suburban area, a rural area. I know here in Cedartown, probably one of the largest Hispanic populations in northwest Georgia, and it's only growing. So someone of Hispanic descent, my father was from Ponce, Puerto Rico. There are great opportunities, I think, for our Hispanic community here in this county. But, everyone's working class, blue collar households, just like my dad was, growing up, working in the trucking industry. So I think whether it's from technology or being a mechanic, like, that's what we have to figure out, or even our younger generation that are signing up and hopefully wanting to join the military. Sometimes it's not something that's being encouraged like it should, but we need more people in the military. Ask our recruiters that live here, live anywhere in this state. But I think there's opportunity to succeed. We just got to create the pathway. We got to show people sometimes. And I know it's not the government's job, but us as leaders, it is our job. And I think we got to go out of our way and, again, have these kind of conversations and not be afraid to have them. And hopefully we can do this more often. And as we close, too, I just want to say, thank you to our veterans. Thank you to our folks that serve. I know Veterans Day is coming up November 11th. Just be mindful of what we're seeing overseas. We're mindful of what we're seeing in Israel. Our police officers that are on the street every day, be praying for them and their families. The ones that are working in these school buildings, our teachers, and everybody who's kind of giving back, but has a parent or a kid at home wondering if they're ever coming back home. And I think those are the people sometimes, I don't want to say we forget, but those legacies should not be diminished as we think about what is the future. I think the future runs through West Georgia. You can ask our transportation leaders in the state, our logistics leaders, our business leaders. Everywhere in this state is growing. The one place that has not had the opportunity, and again I say not had the opportunity, is here. And as long as I'm in this office until y'all kick me out, that is what I'm going to fight for. When I ran, I was the underdog. And sometimes I continue to feel like I'm the underdog because I want to do the unpopular things. But sometimes you got to do the unpopular things to win and see our people win. And that's what I'm going to fight for every single day. So thanks for hosting us and having us here. Katie, thank you for having us here in the high school. And doing something transparent and positive. And hopefully folks will have questions, and if they have questions, they can drop it on our social media chat, call our office. We'll put that up on the screen as we close to reach out. And thank you, Andrew.
Yep, thank you very much. All right.